Steel Division 2 has been announced. Unlike its predecessor, which covered the Normandy campaign in Western Europe, SD2 is going to cover the Eastern Front, specifically 1944 and Operation Bagration. That was the Soviet offensive operation to take back Byelorussia, and it left Wehrmacht Army Group Center devastated with 25 divisions lost. It was not a good time for the Germans. Byelorussia, interestingly, was also the country that had its population most devastated by the war. I think 1 in 3 of its total population was killed throughout the course of it. It's being both developed and published by Eugen. If you're familiar with the series, you might know that the last go-around, they actually had it published by Paradox, but that didn't work out. That's not too much of a break from the norm, actually. The exception was Steel Division Normandy. Usually Eugen does publish their own titles, so I don't think that's going to be much of a problem, and it might actually give them more creative freedom. Not much has been revealed this far. There isn't even a release date, but Gamescom just finished, and I do know that PC Gamer was able to get in and get an early preview with Eugen, and it looks like this might be a pretty interesting title. If you remember Wargame, the AI in it absolutely sucked. I mean, it was just atrocious. It was probably some of the worst AI in an RTS I've ever seen. Basically what would happen is the AI would get 5 times the amount of resources that you would, and they would literally just Zerg rush you, Zerg rush you, Zerg rush you. It knew your location at all times. It cheated. It was just a complete mess. There was basically no tactical thought done whatsoever by the AI. When Steel Division rolled around, it was a complete turnaround. The AI in Steel Division Normandy is actually some of the best I've ever seen in an RTS. It's quite challenging. It does not really cheat. I mean, it does have a slight resource advantage, but just the AI in Steel Division Normandy is 300% better than what it was in Wargame. But the single-player campaign was lacking. You basically had this outstanding AI that you were limited to playing in skirmish mode. SD2 is going to try to remedy that by including a turn-based strategic layer to the game, one where you take control of the actual divisions involved in the operation on a map and make the maneuvers that determine your tactical battles. Now, this has been all but confirmed by the PC Gamer article, and it's awesome. A dual-layer World War II game that incorporates the grand strategy of moving your divisions across Europe, encircling, waging large-scale war, while actually having the option of playing out the battles that you create has always been a dream of mine. I mean, games like Graviteam do it to some extent, but it's generally in a short time frame and on a small scale. This is going to cover an entire operation. If Eugen can really nail this down, they have a real opportunity to differentiate themselves from the competition. Obviously, I would like the strategic aspect of the campaign to be hex-based, but if not, that's fine. I'd really like to have the option of doing encirclements and cutting off supplies. If that can be done, I'll be pretty happy about it. And looking at the article that PC Gamer released, it looks like that may be the case. Let's take a look at it. So let's see. Steel Division 2 doesn't just put a single division under your control. It gives you command of an entire army. Set during Operation Bagration. World War II Soviet campaign. Battles were connected by huge campaign maps. It's an RTS house inside a turn-based war game, with everything recreated on a 1-to-1 scale from the size of the tanks to the maps. The key here being, it's an RTS housed inside of a turn-based war game. So just reading this first paragraph in PC Gamer, it kind of reminds me of something like Total War. Not necessarily in the execution, but in the fact that it's got those dual layers. It has the strategic, and then it has the tactical layer. And I have just always been waiting for this. So I read this first paragraph of the PC Gamer article, and I got pretty stoked, I'm not going to lie. It says 1 minute will be coming. I'm just skimming through it right here. What might have been a single battle in Steel Division 44 is drawn out into a larger conflict. We wanted to add value to the solo campaign, which that's what I'm focusing on here. I'm an old guy. I'm 30 years old. I've got 2 kids. I'm more like focused on Curious George than focused on my ClickFest gains. I don't really have the dexterity for the ClickFest stuff. And I know a lot of people out there watching this may not be either. Actually, if you look at this video I have up, I'm playing against the medium AI, and you can tell that in itself is a handful for me. So I play multiplayer sometimes, but I'm really not a big fan of it. I prefer single player, and honestly, I'd say that most players do. So that's a good thing, I think, for Eugen to be focusing on. But getting back to this dual layer aspect of the game, a lot of times there are problems with games that deal with this subject matter. because success on the strategic map, often translates to multiplying the success in tactical battles and makes them uneven and no fun. Generally, the more success you have on the strategic map, the more unbalanced the tactical battles are, and that you have such an advantage. There's no tactics actually to the combat. It all just comes down really to whoever did best on the strategic map. You've succeeded on the strategic map, so you're going to dominate tactically regardless. And if you're a fan of Wargame and Steel Division, you know that's not what the series is all about. I think that can be managed by Eugen if they play their cards right. The constrained scope of the operation would help to mitigate it. You're not dealing with hundreds of years of time like you would in a Total War game. And if Eugen really plays it right, you're going to be largely focused on the even matchups where you're trying to break through relatively evenly matched divisions to get encirclements and what have you anyway. And you're just going to auto-resolve the destruction of other encircled units or uncompetitive matches. I'm basically hoping that this is the game that would stand on its own as a relatively simple unity of command style strategic game that gives you the options to go down boots on the ground when you want. One other interesting thing I noticed about the article is that it repeatedly mentioned that combat was based on a battalion order of battle structure rather than a divisional. So I don't know if that was just a case of perhaps the author of the article maybe not knowing, not being too much a student of military organization, and he just happened to say battalions rather than divisions, or if it actually is the case that still Division 2 is going to focus on battalions when Normandy 44 focused pretty much exclusively on divisions. How that's going to play out on the deck building, I'm not really sure. I'm inclined to believe that actually it might focus on battalions now, simply because Eugen said that the deck building system is going to be completely revamped. And if they did move from a divisional structure to a battalional structure, it would have to be revamped. What will be really interesting is how they divvy up the composition of the units you decide to fight with if they do switch to battalions. I know because historically with a division, you had separate battalions that were composed. Some battalions were artillery, some might have been infantry. If you had armored divisions, some of your battalions were actual panzers, while others were mechanized infantry. So that gave you a little bit of play with your divisional deck building structure. If you're dealing with battalions, it is a lot more single focused. So like you would have an artillery battalion, you'll have an infantry battalion, you'll have a tank battalion, and there's not much variance involved. So that will be interesting seeing how that plays out. Some final thoughts. According to the article, the phase system is still implemented in Steel Division 2. I know that was an area of contention with a lot of old wargame players. I personally actually enjoyed the phase system. I know it seems like, judging by the forums, that I'm in the minority, but I like how it kind of makes the player play with all of the units that are available in one's deck. With Wargame, it seemed like everyone would skip some of the lower tier units and just immediately go towards the heavy hitters, and it kind of... even though it technically gave you more freedom, it actually felt more restrictive in the fact that those lower tier units were not really ever a real option to you. Another interesting thing is if you look at some of the pictures that Eugen released when they first announced Steel Division 2, you will see right here, showing it on your screen, these smoke columns rising up from destroyed armor. And I will tell you, that is one of the most beautiful sights I have seen in my many years as a gamer. Why they did not implement this sooner, I do not know. But it's there now, so we're happy. Let's see. Just some final thoughts. Some gripes I had with the first Steel Division. I didn't like the tracer colors. I thought it was really ridiculous that they were all yellow. That's silly. And I get it. There's priorities, but it is kind of silly that all the traces are yellow. I know you can't be completely authentic, but how hard is it to change some RGB color values to make them at least semi-accurate? Throw some green, some red, some blue in there, just to appease us that do like the authenticity. Another thing that I think is really weird and sorely lacking, because basically all RTSs have it nowadays. Excuse me, taking a drink of my beer. Waypoint indicators. It's really weird that in 2018 you can click on a unit in an RTS and there's no line telling you where the unit is headed. Especially in a game like Steel Division where the scale is 1-to-1, so once you commit a unit to go to a certain destination, you have to commit to it. And lastly, I think there should be an ambush armor button. If you're familiar with Wargame or the old Steel Division title, you're going to know what I mean. When you're trying to ambush tanks with heat weapons, you really have to micromanage a lot to prevent them from shooting other infantry and exposing themselves before they get in range with the tank. And you can find yourself in a screwed situation, especially if you're one of those old folks like me that average 5 clicks per minute. What they need is a button that directs infantry to not fire upon other non-armored units unless they are fired upon themselves first. It would be a nice complement to the return fire button that's already in-game. But, yeah, these are my thoughts on Steel Division 2 and the recent PC Gamer article. I'm looking forward to playing it. And I hope you had fun dissecting my shitty Steel Division game against the medium AI.